What is up, everyone? In this video, I will be going over some 2-color commanders that have unique abilities for their color identity. My goal of this video is to highlight unique ideas for commanders that you can try out without feeling like every other deck in the color identity. This idea in particular is thanks to KLIE3DH, who commented on my Final Fantasy video. After every Unpopular Cards video, I will pin a comment, and that comment will become a video. And this video in particular, the Final Fantasy one that I'm mentioning, was not very watched, so thanks KL for commenting. It was a lot easier to get pinned for that video. I appreciate you taking the time to watch and share your thoughts. But before we jump into the actual deep dive of the commanders, I wanted to share a few honorable mentions that I thought were really interesting. There's Kadric Soulkindler is a fun Boros commander idea. You know, when people say the legend rule doesn't apply, I'm sure most people jump right to Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, or maybe Orvar the Allform with Mirror Box or Vesuvian Duplimancy, but this guy does it in a color pairing that I don't really expect. Not only does the legend rule not apply to tokens, the cost for making it upon casting is just 1 generic. Like, that is so cheap. Another one is Obsidat Ghost Council as a blink commander in Orzhov, which I think would be super fun. There's only 9 Orzhov creatures that have an ETB ability, but this, with things that blink your entire board, maybe like another round, could be fun, but also really oppressive with the black creature ETB effects that are out there. Another one is Rassilon the War President, who actually, I looked this up. There's only 2 Dimir cards that mention Conspire, and the other one is Memory Sleuth. So casting cards from exile is normally like a red thing, but Dimir could get access to fun abilities when doubled from exile. Final Fantasy also is introducing some unique abilities for their color identities. So some that I'll mention here, there's Black Waltz number 3 for Rakdos Spellslinger. This is like a gutter snipe in the command zone, but for any non-creature spell. Garland Knight of Cornelia is another Rakdos one with a cool new, on-cast triggered ability. And lastly, Zeldinkt is monocolored, but a landfall mono-red commander seems like it could be pretty interesting. Alright, we're now getting into the commanders for today, and we're starting off with the only commander that has over 1,000 decks, which was intentional, and that's Ferg, Judge of Valor, which has 1,298 decks. Ferg is a 5-mana uncommon commander from Kaldheim. She is a 2/4 Angel Cleric with Flying and Lifelink. Her ability says, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So despite almost like 60% of Ferg decks being Reanimator or Angels focused, I think Ferg could lead a very viable and fun Orzhov Spellslinger deck. Her ability triggers on each turn as opposed to just your turn, so in order to achieve that, you would either need to be casting creatures with flash or instants, which is of course the choice that I would go for with this deck. The other commander that I had in mind for like an Orzhov Spellslinger was Lotho Corrupt Sheriff, who triggers for you or anyone. Like, this is a super sneaky good card at accruing value over time. But it came down to the decision of, do I want more mana or card draw? And I like the ability that helps to replenish your hand, which then would let you not have to focus so much on a ton of cantrips and be able to use other valuable cards in order to get that second cast trigger. But Lotho is perfect for the 99 of Ferg. Black instants usually require sacrificing, which makes it cheaper. Things like Village Rites or Deadly Dispute. So things that make creatures upon casting spells will be huge, like Monastery Mentor and Sedgemoor Witch. There's also a new card, Summon Good King Mog the 12th, which has a very nice second and third abilities, which would go good in this deck as well. Black also has access to one of my favorite Magecraft abilities, which is Professor Onyx, who can just pop off with something like Plumb the Forbidden or any other Storm cards that you might want to play. Final Fantasy also released some new Orzhov like spell singing support, which I think is going to be super fun, which these options drain the table. There's Papalamo, Totolimo, Transpose, Cornered by Black Mages, Black Mage's Rod, and Circle of Power, all of which create mages that drain the board whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Lastly, since you are filling your graveyard, you can also run cheap recursion spells like Reanimate, Helping Hand, Return Triumphant, and others to bring back creatures from your graveyard. The mechanic of casting the second spell on turn is one of my favorites, actually. I have a Crumb Violent Cacophony deck, and I have a ton of fun with that, and so maybe this is a commander that I'll take interest in and give it a shot. Next up, we have Dacos Crafter of Wonders, who is an Izzet commander with 843 decks. Dacos costs 1 generic, 1 blue, and 1 red for a 2/4 Merfolk Artificer. You can tap Dacos to add 2 generic mana, which can only be used to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. The second ability says, equipped creatures you control have flying and haste. In my opinion, Izzet has one of the most defined silos of what the color identity actually does. You know, the majority of them revolve around spellcasting. Then there's other effects like Chaos, there's discard, second spells, and a lot of them also focus on artifacts, which, yes, this commander does focus on artifacts, like it has that aspect, but what I'm focusing more on is the second ability, which is very unique for the color identity. You know, giving equipped creatures flying and haste is a very Boros thing to do, and it gives some of the best keywords when it comes to attacking the same turn to get through. I think a fun build approach for this commander is imagining it as if it were a Boros deck, but it can give attacking benefits to blue and Izzet creatures instead. Sure, you are missing out on a lot of the free equip abilities that white offers, but I do think blue brings a ton of strengths to the table, like drawing, making copies of your best equipment, evasion, and, of course, counters. So what I think would be interesting for this deck is to do something that an Izzet equipment commander can do that Boros equipment commanders cannot. And so for some of them, the first part is picking what equipment you want to use. So maybe that's the sword cycle, we got some Warhammers and more. Blue also has a lot of ways to copy those artifacts for double value. There's Mechanized Production, which makes one each turn. Season of Weaving can make 1 or 2 copies. Depends on what your choices are. There's Copy Artifact. Saheeli's Artistry. Echo Storm can make multiple copies. And Phyrexian Metamorph is obviously a classic. And with the number of artifacts that you're casting or copying, blue opens up a huge artifact fall synergy with cards like Simulacrum Synthesizer to make huge constructs that can be equipped for haste and flying. Kappa Cannoneer has evasion and a big ward, or cast triggers like Joyra Weatherlight Captain to draw. There's Psy Master Thopterus to build up a board, or even something simple like Artificer's Assistant can filter through your library. You also gain access to all the Saheeli Planeswalkers, all of which are focused on artifacts and can also copy some artifacts as well. If you are making a bunch of token copies of said artifacts and equipment, Brutaclad Telcore Engineer could be a super funny one. Then there's also Urza Lord High Artificer, who can help with the equip costs by tapping the equipment to pay for those costs. And, usually equipment don't tap, and so that's just free value right there. The commander itself also helps to pay for said equip abilities too. In terms of what creatures you want to actually be giving the haste and flying with the equipment you're running, there's all the big red creatures that Boros has access to. There's Eldrazi, a bunch of dragons, But you also get fun things like Sphinxes, maybe a Stormtide Leviathan, so that your creatures can all attack, because if they're equipped, they have flying. There's also things like clones. That's a classic for blue. Maybe instead of having predetermined creatures that you want to be attacking with, you just copy the best creature on the board, you equip it, give it flying and haste, and a sword of, something scary and something scarier. So it is bigger than the original creature that you just copied. This is one, approach for this commander, but I think that playing to the strengths of blue is what would really make this fun. And for all my Brutaclad fans out there, I'd love to know, what is the funniest token that you have ever either seen or personally made a huge mass of? And what ended up happening when you made a ton of said token copies. Next up, we're jumping to Celestnia. We have Safi Eriksdotter, who has 661 decks. Safi is a 2/2 human scout that costs 1 green and 1 white, and her ability says, sacrifice Safi Eriksdotter. When target creature is put into your graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield. So this is an interesting one. I think it supports a lot of strategies, all of which are pretty unique when it comes to a Celestnia commander. You could go an Aristocrats build, you could go a discard/reanimator deck, or a blink deck with all of the things that you want to be recurring. And while the ability itself doesn't work with discarding, the reason why I say discard is because we can play other creatures that cheat in bigger creatures when they enter the battlefield from your graveyard. We can then sacrifice them to bring back and keep getting newer and bigger creatures from the graveyard onto the battlefield. So in terms of actual creatures that sacrifice themselves, there's a lot of the small ones like Loyal Retainers, Spore Frog, Sakura Tribe Elder, and Haywire Mite. But these are, like I said, smaller ones that we don't really want to be sacrificing our commander for, but rather these will be in and out of the graveyard with other recursion abilities. White has so many ways to bring back cheap creatures in mass that are 2 or 3 power or CMC or less. Things like Ascend from Avernus or Dewdrop Cure. With this being an Aristocrats type deck that runs colorless sacrifice outlets like the Altars, or equipment like there's Dissection Tool or Demon Mail Halberg, there's a lot of powerful cards with death triggers that we could abuse. Protean Hulk is a classic that can fetch key pieces right onto the battlefield, then we sacrifice our commander to bring it back to just sacrifice again and do it all over again. Pattern of Rebirth lets you fetch any creature of any CMC right onto the battlefield when the enchanted creature dies. And Spinner of Souls can keep refilling our hand with new creatures whenever a non-token creature dies. In terms of recursion, White just has so much. There's things that come with conditions in terms of how small the creature needs to be. So that's the said Sakura Tribe Elders that I was talking about. These are things like Revelark, Angel of Indemnity, Sun Titan, Extraction Specialist, and Jackdaw Savior. But the great thing about our commander is it fits that 2 mana or less restriction. So you could sacrifice Ao the Dawnsky, get the death trigger, sacrifice Safi, whatever it is, to bring back Ao, then attack with Sun Titan to bring back Safi, to then sacrifice Ao and bring it back again. So there's just so much shenanigans that you can do with this. Other recursion cards that straight up just recur creatures are things like Karmic Guide to bring back anyone, Amaria Shepherd who brings them back if you play a Plains, or not even have to play, it just has to enter the battlefield. And so in green, you could do Harrow, you can do things that bring in 3 or more and just bring back a ton of your graveyard. Then there's Late to Dinner, Court of Ardenvale, and Rhea Dawnbringer. Another crazy good one is Luminous Broodmoth, which can help double ETBs or LTBs if you have that sacrifice outlet. You can see that a lot of these creatures that I'm mentioning do have a high mana cost, and that's why having a discard outlet or maybe cycling, things like Key to the City and Collector's Vault can really help to get the engine rolling. Green and white also just has so many big Timmy creatures that could bring a ton of fun to this deck. I'm curious, this is a Celestnia Aristocrats deck. What other Aristocrat commanders do you enjoy that are off color? So something that doesn't have black or your typical Aristocrat style decks. If you're enjoying this content and would like to support the channel, you can join our Unpopular MTG Club Patreon for access to hundreds of deck lists from competitions. There's a Discord community and also monthly collector booster giveaways. You'll actually be able to join in time for July's collector booster giveaway, where I'll be spinning a wheel to give a Double Masters 2022 collector booster pack to a patron for free, just as a thank you for supporting the channel. Our next commander is Eartha Joe, Frontier Mentor, who has 586 decks. Eartha is a 2/4 core advisor who costs 2 generic, 1 red, and 1 white. Her ability says, when Eartha Joe enters, create a 1/1 red mercenary creature token with tap. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. Whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, because the first part of Eartha's ability creates a mercenary token with an ability that can be copied by the second one, it naturally puts you in the mindset of creature abilities or maybe mercenary tokens to make attackers stronger. But the reason why I'm highlighting Eartha in this video is as an Unpopular Super Friends deck. You activate Planeswalker's abilities, so if you have one that targets a creature or a player, you can double it. Granted, you are limited to only red, white, and colorless Planeswalkers, but there's still a lot that fit the bill. According to Scryfall, there are 91 Planeswalkers that we could play in this deck. A ton of them, we got a Johnny's, there's something like Johnny Adversary of Tyrants, which puts a +1/+1 counter on target creatures, which can then be copied, or maybe not counters, but you want to go with something like a Johnny Steadfast, who gives a buff, first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. Bazri Ket gives a +1 counter and indestructibility until end of turn. Elspeth Resplendent can put some nice keyword counters on your creatures, and Grandmaster of Flowers can disable 2 threats from attacking or blocking you for an entire turn cycle. A ton of the Chandras deal direct damage. There's things like Chandra Bold Pyromancer, which is a nice one too because it gives you mana. There's one of my favorites is Chandra Hope's Beacon. The copying an instant or sorcery is just insane. Eartha's rules specifically say that if you copy, the copy will have the same targets as the ability it's copying unless you choose new ones. You may change any number of the targets, including all of them or none of them. The new targets must be legal. So with this Chandra, you could play it, and then the turn it comes down, you could -4 to deal 4 damage to 4 creatures. A Johnny Nakato Pariah from MH3 has an insane ability when it flips that can deal damage to any target equal to the number of creatures you control, which in white can be a lot, and then you just double it. And, we have all the Elspeths as well to create a ton of creature tokens to help block and be that wall if people are trying to attack our Planeswalkers. One more fun Planeswalker ability that I think could be a fun build around is Luca Coppercoat Outcast, who can just straight up polymorph 2 creatures into big threats from your deck. These colors also have some good Planeswalker support. There's Lizelle Vlaakith's Champion to put an additional counter on Planeswalkers per activation. Oath of Gideon makes them enter with an extra loyalty counter. Onaki Oathkeeper and Archangel of Tithes make it more expensive to attack. And Jaya's Phoenix can just be a pain to get rid of permanently. Lastly, you could run Farewell and choose all modes, and it would kind of be like a one-sided board wipe because you keep all of your Planeswalkers, and most people probably aren't running as much as you. I'm curious, do you personally run Farewell in your decks, or does it just feel too salty? Okay, our last commander of the day is Exava Rakdos Blood Witch, who has 397 total decks. Exava costs 2 generic, a red, and a black. It is a 3/3 human cleric that has first strike, haste, and unleash. So if you're unfamiliar with the mechanic, it says, you may have this creature enter with a +1/+1 counter on it. It can't block as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it. So each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has haste. And if you haven't guessed it, this is pretty unique because it is a +1/+1 themed deck. On EDH Rec, there is one commander in the top 24 shown for the +1/+1 counter theme, and that is Marchesa the Black Rose. Green just has literally all of the +1 support and synergy out there, and so it just makes sense if you're doing a +1 counter deck that it has green, but that's why this one kind of breaks that mold. There's honestly not a ton of +1/+1 counter synergy like in green, but there's enough that we could make this deck pretty fun. Unspeakable Symbol, Uncivil Unrest, and Amok all have ways to give +1 counters to any creature, which would then grant those creatures haste. And what's fun about Rakdos is there are so many sacrifice outlets, so this commander can work well with abusing death triggers, or enters the battlefield triggers with cards like that give +1 counters like Feign Death, Undying Evil, Undying Malice. Granted, these do return the creature to the battlefield tapped, so the haste aspect isn't really relevant for this, but there are several other abilities and payoffs in these colors that can benefit from creatures just having counters on them. Things like Skyclave Shadowcat draws a card whenever a creature you control with a +1 counter on it dies. Blood Tracker and Bone Devourer draw cards for the number of counters on it when it dies. Red has a lot of access to benefits for modified creatures, like Aki Battle Squad, which gives extra combats for said modified creatures you own, and Mirror Style Master copies modified creatures when they attack. So give maybe a +1/+1 counter to any dragon with a big ETB effect, or something like a Fanatic of Mogus, and then attack with Mirror Style Master, and you can do some huge work. The last thing that I'll mention is there are several creatures that enter with a ton of +1/+1 counters on them that could just swing out of nowhere and maybe take out an unsuspecting opponent. Havoc Eater scales with the big creatures on your opponent's board. If you play a lot of big instants and sorceries, then Inferno Project could do a ton of damage when it has haste. Aetherborn Marauder can steal all of the counters on your other creatures since you no longer need them because they don't have summoning sickness anymore. And then another one, which I think is just crazy, if you've ever seen anyone get 30 plus mana from casting a Mana Geyser, then Ignition Team would come in with that 30 plus mana and even more because it counts your tapped lands as well. And all of those would be +1/+1 counters with haste. I think there's just so many fun directions that you could take in these colors with Undying, Devour, Tribute, something like Oracle of Bones. We got Backup, Modify Support, and just so much more. That's just scratching the surface. But that's everything that I have for this video. As always, let me know in the comments below what you thought and what topic you'd like me to cover next. I respond to every comment, but one of them will be pinned and become a video just like this. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and even more for those who do take the time to comment. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.